Hi, everybody. So we're going to start again in just a couple of minutes. A couple of quick announcements first. First of all, thank you all so much for coming out on Labor Day freaking weekend. We realize that, transportation is completely and unutterably fucked up all over the Bay Area, and so thank you so much for making the effort to come here tonight. A couple of quick notes. Has anybody found a set of keys? It's on a red lanyard with, ironically enough, a Virgin Mary on it. If you found that, please let one of your glorious hosts or hostesses know, or let Carol Queen know, because somebody needs that back. Also, we want to plug the Godless Perverts Social Club. That's like this, except without people standing up and reading stuff. It's just like hanging out. It's basically just a casual meetup, conversation, socializing, and schmoozing time for atheists and other non-believers who want to talk about sex or just whatever. And it's the first Tuesday of every month at Wicked Grounds, and oddly, the first Tuesday of the month is this coming Tuesday. At Wicked Grounds, which is on 8th and Folsom, and it's from 7 to 9 p.m. So if you want to just come hang out, please do that. We have a mailing list on the back at the food table. It was sort of drifting around for a while, but if you want to find out about more Godless Perverts events, get on our sign-up sheet. And also, if you just get on the Bay Area atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, humanists, skeptics, brights, and everything else meetup list, that'll tell you about all of our stuff as well as every other freaking atheist event in the Bay Area. So that's kind of awesome. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce David Fitzgerald. David Fitzgerald is a writer and historical researcher who has been actively investigating the historical Jesus question for over 10 years. So that actually is the answer to how big is Jesus. Jesus is zero because Jesus didn't exist. He has a degree in history and was an associate member of CSER, the former Committee for the Scientific Examination of Religion. He also writes heretic-friendly erotica under the name Kilt Patrick, which is, stuff is at the back. David serves on the boards of San Francisco Atheists and Center for Inquiry San Francisco, and is founder and director of both the world's first atheist film festival, which really, if you haven't been, it is awesome. It's in September, it's killer, it's so wonderful. And Evolutionpalooza, San Francisco's oldest Darwin Day celebration. He lectures around the country at universities and national secular events, and is best known for Nailed, 10 Christian myths that show Jesus never existed at all, and also that he had a really tiny dick. His latest book is The Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion, Book 1, The Mormons. Ladies, gentlemen, and others, David Fitzgerald.
All right. And again, one last plug for the Atheist Film Festival, September 14th, coming up soon. Apologies in advance to all the secular Jews out there. I know it's Yom Kippur. We didn't know that when we got the venue, but it is nonetheless. And that director's reception party is really awesome. I do want to read just a little bit of my book, The Mormons, or as I like to call it, Steampunk Scientology. This is a little segment from Chapter 5, Days of Our Wives, Mormon Polygamy. Whenever I see a pretty woman, I have to pray for grace, Joseph once remarked to a friend. Polygamy, or as he sometimes called it, the blessings of Jacob, may have started as early as 1830. I say may have because it's nearly impossible to say when the principle began. Initially, Joseph didn't tell his wife or friends about it. The only ones in the know were the new spouses. For several years, it was kept top secret, taught to no one other than a very select few, and then actively, emphatically denied, publicly and in print, repeatedly, for years. As early as 1832, he explained to his innermost circle the reason for all the deception was to protect the holy truth, nestled deep inside like the gooey center of a Tootsie Pop. The Lord had vouchsafed that the taking of extra wives was a true principle, but the time was not yet come for it to be practiced, or at least be made public. His first plural wives were just fine with that, since they were already married to other men, several of whom he sent off on faraway and protracted missionary assignments. The wives left behind were known as the church widows, and just as Scripture instructs us, Joseph did not forget to take care of the widows. Due to the problematic circumstances, it's also hard to pin down just how many bonus wives he managed to collect over his short but frisky lifetime. Even today, the exact count is still debated by scholars, but most agree it appears close to 50 at least. Mormon historian Todd Compton, author of the exhaustively researched In Sacred Loneliness, The Plural Wives of Joseph Smith, has come up with 38 well-documented wives, 8 more likely wives with less certain evidence, and still 8 more suspected wives who sealed themselves to Joseph for eternity in posthumous temple weddings shortly after his death. Mormon weddings or sealings can be for time, meaning just for this life, and or for eternity after death. Let's see, which brings us to an estimated total of at least 49 wives during his life that we know of. And Joseph didn't stop accumulating even more wives just because he was dead. Dozens more continued to be sealed to him for years afterwards. Researcher Stanley Ivins reported that Joseph was sealed to 66 or 67 living women, and after his death, another 149 dead women were sealed to him as well. Incidentally, sealing themselves to Joseph for eternity would mean that when their own husbands arrived in the afterlife, they would be in for a shock, suddenly finding themselves without their wives or children for eternity. How they were supposed to carry off their track to godhood without them is anybody's guess. Joseph's wives included 5 pairs of sisters and 1 mother-daughter pair. At least 12 were already married to other men. Another 10 were under the age of 20. Of these, 6 originally came into the Smith house to live as wards. His youngest brides were 14. One wife, Mary Elizabeth Rollins Leitner, claimed that Smith secretly approached her in 1834, when she was 12, and let her know about his great vision concerning me. He said I was the first woman God commanded him to take as a plural wife. And it wasn't Joseph's idea. He also informed her that an angel with a sword threatened to kill him if he failed to marry her. Well, as it turned out, she wasn't the first, but she did become Smith's ninth wife at age 24 while married to another man. The first real wife appears to have been Fanny Alger, an attractive and popular 17-year-old orphan girl living in the Smith house in Kirkland as a domestic servant in 1833. Contemporaries described her as comely and nice, a very pretty, pleasing little girl, loved by all. It was well known that she and Emma were extremely fond. Emma is his wife, his real wife. She and Emma were extremely fond of one another. Less known that Joseph was also fond of her. Fanny and Joseph had an ongoing affair for around 2 years until one day sometime in 1835 when Emma spied on them through a crack in the barn planks and saw the transaction. Direct quote. Enraged, Emma tossed the girl out, a pattern that would be played out again and again in the Smith household for the rest of their lives. Honestly, though, it's a bit much to characterize Joseph Smith and Fanny's special relationship as anything so lofty as a spiritual marriage. In actuality, Fanny only became a plural wife in hindsight. Decades later, long after polygamy had come out of the closet and become respectable, church leaders looked back on Fanny and decided, oh, she must have been the first of Joseph's celestial wives, and retroactively elevated her from filthy little hussy to first plural wife. By then, Fanny had long since moved away to Indiana, married and raised lots of kids, and whenever questioned about her relationship to the prophet, she had no comment. But at the time, it was nothing short of scandal. Book of Mormon secretary and angel eyewitness Oliver Cowdery lost all respect for Joseph after the Fanny Alger affair, or as he put it, the dirty, nasty, filthy affair. In August 1835, Cowdery issued an official denunciation of polygamy while Joseph was away. It was later replaced by Section 132 of Doctrines and Covenants, which incidentally is still in there today. Cowdery was also replaced, eventually being tried for several church offenses, including insinuating that the prophet had been guilty of adultery, and at last he was excommunicated. Another early incident nearly ended Joseph's matrimonial career before it began. A disgruntled ex-Mormon, he had left the church because a special revelation given him on his behalf had misspelled his name, and a drunken gang came after Joseph by night, smashing their way in and dragging him out of bed out into the frozen ground. They stripped him naked and after a savage beating, tarred and feathered him. One of them demanded Joseph also be castrated. He had been too intimate with the man's sister. Nancy Miranda Joseph. They had even brought a doctor with them to carry out the procedure, but at the last moment, the doctor couldn't bring himself to go through with it. Nancy Miranda later became one of Joseph's first plural wives. He continued to take more wives throughout the 1830s in Ohio and Missouri, ramping up his spouse hunting into high gear in Nauvoo around 1842 to 1843. He did whatever was necessary, including bald-faced lying, to conceal it from everyone except a very carefully select few of his inner circle. Now, it's easy to dismiss his doctrine of polygamy as nothing more than a remarkably convenient sanction for an unchecked libido. And though there is ample evidence that his plural marriages were often motivated by restlessness in his pants rather than divine coercion by sword-wielding angels, he also used polygamy to serve non-sexual, albeit still somewhat twisted purposes. Historians like Compton and Lawrence Foster have noticed that Joseph often asked his close friends for their wives and daughters. In 1842, he approached Apostle Herbert C. Kimball, and asked for his wife. After 3 agonizing days, Kimball, with a broken and bleeding heart, quote unquote, led his wife to the prophet and handed her over. But, psych, Joseph didn't really want her. He told the gobsmacked couple the whole ordeal had just been a loyalty test. No! However, a year later, Kimball offered up his young daughter Helen to become another of Joseph's wives, and this time the prophet accepted. Let me skip to another part, because I can't resist telling you, picking up girls the Joe Smith way. Just how did Joseph Smith manage to compel so many young women to spiritually shack up with him, especially before polygamy became officially announced? Largely with strong-arm tactics. Joseph pressured girls with tight deadlines, big promises, and heavy spiritual blackmail. Helen Kimball, daughter of Apostle Ebert C. Kimball, gave a revealing glimpse into his playbook in her memoirs. When her father first told her about Joseph's plans for her, she was shocked. She had never heard of polygamy or plural marriage, and besides, she was only a 15-year-old girl, and already in love with a boy closer to her age. Joseph gave her a 24-hour deadline to make up her mind, and told her, if you take this step, it will ensure your eternal salvation and exaltation, and that of your father's household and all of your kindred. Helen succumbed to Joseph's matrimonial extortion to become his probably 26th wife. In her later years, she wrote spirited defenses of polygamy, though oddly never mentioning her marriage to Joseph. During her tenure as his wife, though, she wrote tormented poetry confessing her loathing and temptation to rebel, at one point writing, "I hated polygamy in my heart." Fortunately, after Joseph's death, she was able to enjoy the rest of her teenage years and even marry her child's sweetheart after all. Oh, I know. Just prior to Helen, Joseph set his eyes on Lucy Walker. In her memoir, she described her courtship in great detail. After her mother died of malaria, Joseph sent her father away on a mission and broke up the family among other families, taking 16-year-old Lucy into his house to work for Emma. One day, Joseph called for her and informed her that God had commanded him to take her as another wife. He explained the secret new doctrine of plural marriage and afterwards asked her what she had to say. "Nothing," she replied, thinking, "How could I speak? What would I say?" She wrote of feeling tempted and tortured beyond endurance and wanting to die right there to be with her mother. Joseph ended with an ultimatum, telling the speechless girl, "I have no flattering words to offer. It is a command of God to you. I will give you until tomorrow to decide this matter. If you reject this message, the gate will be closed forever against you." She wrote, "This aroused every drop of scotch in my veins, and for a few tense moments stood fiercely, staring him in the eye without a word. I felt at this moment that I was called to place myself upon the altar, a living sacrifice." When she spoke, she said, prophet of God or no, she could not take such a big step without a sign from God. She would rather die. He came up to her, beaming, and assured her she would have one, a joy and a peace that you never knew. And after a sleepless night, earnestly praying for guidance, just before dawn, her requisite sign came to her, and she gave in. "It was not a love matter," she wrote, "but simply the giving up of myself as a sacrifice to establish that grand and glorious principle that God had revealed to the world. On May 1st, 1843, just after turning 17, she was hurriedly wed to Joseph in a secret ceremony while Emma was away on a shopping trip to St. Louis. Lucy admitted in court in 1892 that Emma never knew of the marriage. Let me read just one more incident because it's so good. The Nancy Rigdon incident. But not all succumbed to his charms. We know of at least 5 prospective brides who spurned him. One of these rejections blew up in his face so spectacularly it cost him 2 of his closest lieutenants. One day in 1842, Joseph invited 19-year-old Nancy Rigdon to the home of another Nancy, Mrs. Nancy Miranda Hyde, wife of Apostle Orson Hyde, who Joseph had sent off on an extended missionary assignment to Palestine. And that's the same one that almost got him castrated earlier in the book there. Mrs. Hyde, in the meantime, had become another of Joseph's plural wives. Joseph greeted the girl, ushered her into a private room, and locked the door behind them. After swearing her to secrecy, he told her how he had liked her for several years and that he wished that she would be his. He hastened to assure her that the Lord was well pleased with the idea and that there was no sin in it whatsoever. The shocked girl went ballistic. She had already been warned about Joseph's designs for her by the notorious John C. Bennett, who also had his eye on her. She snubbed his advances too. So not only did the feisty girl not fall for his standard "God has commanded me to take you for another wife" proposal, she immediately turned on him, raging away with hot tears. Flustered, Joseph called Mrs. Hyde into the room to help win Nancy over. The young wife tried to tell her that she had been surprised herself when she had first learned about celestial marriage, but promised it was true and that great exultation would come to those who received and embraced it. But Nancy countered that if she ever got married, she would marry a single man or not at all. Then she threatened to shoot him down. Then she threatened to scream her head off until the entire town came running unless Joseph let her go at once. The rattled prophet did just that. The next day he tried again, this time versus personal letter to Nancy. Incidentally, you can read it for yourself. The text is still available today, published in History of the Church, Volume 5, page 134-6. It's presented as an essay on happiness, with an editorial note innocently declaring, it's not possibly known what occasioned the writing of this essay. The letter is not a pleasant read. Really, it's little more than a sanctimonious verbal thumbscrew that includes this little gem. That which is wrong under one circumstance may be, and often is, right under another. Thank you. Thank you, Republicans. Whatever God requires is right, no matter what it is, although we may not see the reason thereof until long after the events transpire. It goes on from there, switching back and forth between carrot and stick, promising joy and peace and obedience, but darkly warning that blessings offered but rejected are no longer blessings. A few lines of attempted verse follow, including, be wise today, 'tis madness to defer. Next day the fatal precedent may plead. That doesn't even rhyme. You're Jimmy Smith. He informs her that God is more liberal in his views than we are ready to believe, but at the same time is more awful in the executions of his punishments than we suppose him to be. Not smart. His touching words didn't just fail to win over the heart of young Nancy, they bit him on the ass. She promptly ran to her father with a letter. Never terribly stable at the best of times, her father, Sidney Rigdon, sent for him at once. Joseph arrived to find Rigdon wild-eyed with fury, demanding an explanation for his behavior. But first, Joseph stonewalled and denied everything. But when the girl's father shoved the letter in his face, he broke down and admitted the truth, claiming he was only testing Nancy's virtue. Sidney Rigdon didn't buy it, and things deteriorated between them after that. Soon, everyone in town knew about Joseph's botched romance of Nancy. Joseph blamed John Bennett for the whole disaster, and their relationship soon crashed and burned. When Bennett turned against Joseph, one of the damning pieces of evidence brought to light against Joseph was his letter to Nancy.